teach them that the Son of Man must undergo great suffering and be rejected by the elders, the chief priests, and the scribes, that he would be killed, and after 3 days rise again. He said all of this quite openly. And Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him. But turning and looking at his disciples, he rebuked Peter and said, "Get behind me, Satan. For you are setting your mind not on divine things, but on human things." Then Jesus called the crowd with his disciples and said to them, "If any want to become my followers, let them deny themselves, take up their cross and follow me. For those who want to save their life will lose it. And those who lose their life for my sake and for the sake of the gospel will save it. For what will it profit them to gain the whole world and forfeit their life? Indeed, what can they give in return for their life? Those who are ashamed of me and of my words in this adulterous and sinful generation, of them the Son of Man will also be ashamed when he comes in the glory of his Father with the holy angels." Again, verse 31, then he began to teach them that the Son of Man must undergo great suffering and be rejected by the elders, the chief priests, and the scribes, and be killed, and after 3 days rise again. This morning, I'd like to talk from this thought. Worship requires theological reflection. Everybody say, worship requires theological reflection. Now, if you are wondering why we changed the order of service, it is because the order of service is not our Lord. That it exists for us to worship, and this is the way we're being led. And so when you think about this text and this title, as I shared this morning at 8 o'clock, Brother Riley, I tried desperately to name this sermon something else. Worship requires theological reflection. It sounds too egg-heady, too wonky, too seminary-ish, but I could not abandon this title because it is what it is. It is true. If you are to worship God, it requires theological reflection. In other words, Kasanga, what you must do when you worship God is to be clear about who God is and who God is not. You must be clear about what purposes are God's purposes and what purposes are not. If we are worshiping the wrong God, is it really worship? If we are confused as to what God's purposes are, how then are we built up into the body that God calls to go into the world to be salt and light? Just some months ago, I was listening to a gospel radio station. I don't listen often. And when I listened, I heard somebody singing and telling the folk to give God a crazy praise. And I was disturbed. I immediately turned the radio off because that is the height of ignorance. To associate the praise of God with craziness. To associate the praise of God not with thoughtful reflection on who God is and what God has done, but with craziness. To associate, as I have heard some worship leaders, give God mindless, crazy worship. My worship of God is never crazy. My worship of God is never mindless, because when I think, listen, of what the Lord has done, I say thank you. Thinking is a prerequisite for worship. You cannot worship God unless you think. Jesus says to love the Lord with all of your hearts, your souls, and your minds. You cannot love God when you crazy. You cannot love God crazily. You cannot love God mindlessly. We love and worship God because we are clear about who God is and what God has done. Is anybody who came to worship today because you're clear that you're 80 years old because God kept you for 80 years? You're clear that you woke up this morning because God woke you up, and there's nothing crazy about that. When I think of what the Lord has done, my worship rises because I know who it is that's blessing me. I know who it is who's keeping me. I know who it is who's healed me. The challenge that we have today is we need clarity around who God is and what God is doing. And on this second Sunday of Lent, we are on a journey. Somebody say journey. We are on a journey with Jesus, a 40-day journey down the Via Dolorosa. That is the way of suffering and pain and betrayal. I need us to understand that we are not on a journey to the Oprah Winfrey Show. You will not look under your pews and find the keys to a brand new car. You will not look under your pews and find the keys to a brand new house in a suburban development with a 3-car garage. Behind me are not 3 foreign automobiles, but 3 crosses. One for Jesus, one for you, and one for me. The truth of the matter is that Jesus has been clear about who he is and what he's going to do and what he's calling us to do from the very beginning. But we listened to Billy Graham, who told us that all we had to do was to come and pray a prayer from Romans 8. And we die and go to heaven. Billy Graham was preaching something, but it wasn't the gospel of Jesus Christ. Gospel of Jesus Christ is not about saying some 2 or 3 word prayer and dying and going to heaven. And Billy Graham wasn't thinking about what was going on earth because he was already in heaven, not concerned about those of us who were in hell on earth. Yeah, what Billy Graham offered was something, but it was not the gospel. What Joel Osteen is offering you. He's offering you smiling preachers with flawless white bleached teeth. No gaps, no spaces. He's offering you parking spaces at the front of the mall. And a free first-class upgrade when you fly the friendly sky. He's giving you something, but it is not the gospel. Even in our own churches, there are those who preach what is called the prosperity gospel. And the Reverend Dr. J. Cameron Carter, great theologian, helped me to understand that the prosperity gospel arises from people who have been cut off from the economy. The reason it is so attractive is because people have been crushed and bruised. They can't find a job. They can't take care of their children. They can't buy their medicine. And so they are prey to a gospel that tells you that if you have enough faith, if you got enough praise and worship, God will give you what it is that you want. I've been with preachers who have told their people the reason you're sick is because you won't worship enough. The reason that you don't have what you want is because you don't have enough praise. What is that? That is not the gospel. No. Did Jesus end up on Calvary's cross because he did not know how to worship? Was Jesus taken by Rome because he did not know how to praise? What kind of foolishness is that? Come on. Packing stadiums and selling books, getting rich off of people's brokenness. What does Jesus say about his ministry? What does Jesus say about God? Jesus says in verse 31, let me offer you disciples, the 12 who have walked with me, who have heard me snore and heard me laugh, who know my pain and who know my joy. You have walked with me, brothers, and now let's have some theological reflection. I'm about to blow your mind. Didn't I blow your mind this time? Didn't I? Yeah, he's about to blow their minds. I'm about to take the God that you know and twist it matrix style. I'm about to help you understand not the idol God to whom you pray, but the God that made you. I'm about to help you to understand how God is at work in the world through me. He says, the Son of Man must undergo great suffering. You mean to tell me God is associated with suffering? Yes. The Son of Man will be rejected by the elders. That would be the lay people in the church. Yeah, y'all rejected it. Then he says, I will be rejected by the priests. Y'all point to me and say, that's you, Lamar, that's you. The Son of Man will be rejected not only by the chief priests and the elders, but by the scribes. Those are the ones with the PhDs in Bible and theology and preaching, those who know everything but God. I will be rejected by the lay folk in the pews, by the preachers in their robes, by the scholars in their ivory towers, and they will not only reject me, but they will kill me. I need somebody who feels rejected today and betrayed today to understand that you have not been abandoned by God, but you are exactly where Jesus found himself. I need you to understand that your rejection and your pain is not a sign that God has left you. It is a sign that God has experienced everything that you experienced. I don't know about you, but a God up in the sky can't help me. I need a God, Sister Maria, who knows what it's like to have a grandson in pain. I need a God who knows what it's like to bury a child, a God who knows what it's like to get a cancer diagnosis, a God who knows what it's like to be betrayed by family and friends. He began to teach him, the Son of Man must undergo, hear me, must. He cannot escape it. He cannot go around it. He must undergo it. And let me share a word with you. You cannot escape it. I cannot escape it. Church will not allow you to go over your pain or under your pain or around your pain. You got to go. The Son of Man will suffer, be rejected by the priests and the scribes and the elders, and they will kill me. Jesus was not spared from death, and neither will we be. You need to know with your young and strong and beautiful self, eventually you will be rolled down the aisle and carried out. I will be killed. Now, with all of this theological reflection is messing with their conception of who God is and how God works, Peter raises himself up as we would, and the Greek word there, I'll spare you all the technicalities, essentially what Peter says to Jesus is shut up. Essentially the word says shut up. What you are doing, Jesus, is upsetting our conception of who God is. God is not one who suffers. God is not one who is rejected. God is not one who tastes betrayal. God is the one who will swing down like the Black Panther, kick Rome in its backside, and take over Wakanda. That's the God you want. That's not the God you got. How many of you have sat on the front row looking at your child, looking at your wife, looking at your parent, and saying, God, if you got any power, get them out of that box? Yes, sir. God didn't do it. You looked the physician in the eye when she comes and tells you you have an incurable disease. God didn't get you out of it. Some tall, handsome physician like Dr. Curry comes to you and tells you that you got major cardiac difficulties. You're still living with it. Peter says, this ain't the God my mama told me about. This ain't the God Tillman Gerald in the Sunday school told me about. This ain't the God Lamar was preaching about. What? Have I been bamboozled? Have I been tricked? Did Plymouth Rock just land on me? Peter says to Jesus, shut up. But Jesus, listen, rebukes Peter. And as a matter of fact, Jesus says shut up again, but in stronger language. And he says, get behind me, Satan. He calls Peter Satan, the one who opposes God. Get behind me, because your mind is set on earthly things and not on heavenly things. Let me share with you, the earthly thing is wanting God to get us out of the things that we're in, not being willing to endure, not being willing to suffer and sacrifice. That is the earthly thing. The heavenly thing is that God is with us in the fire, with us in the flood, with us in our pain. And is there anybody here today who has been through the fire and you were not consumed? You've been through the flood and you did not drown because God was with you. John, with you in your suffering, with you in your pain, with you in your rejection. Get behind me, Satan. You're selling a Billy Graham God. You're selling a Joel Osteen God. You're selling a prosperity preacher God. That is not the God who is. That is the God you want. Then what he says now is, he was talking first to his disciples, Brother Walter, but now he talks to everybody. He says, I need all y'all to come and listen to this because I'm not selling you foolishness. I'm not lying to you. I need you to know that if you are going to become my followers, the first thing you've got to do is learn how to deny yourself. If you always insist on your own way, if it is your party or else, you're not following Jesus. We must learn how to deny ourselves, take up our crosses and follow. And I need us to understand that there is a cross for me and there is a cross for you. I don't know what your cross is and you don't know what my cross is, but none of us escapes life without carrying crosses. Is anybody here today who is carrying a cross? Is anybody here who has carried a cross? If you're not clapping yet, I will tell you, your cross is waiting for you. Those who want to save their lives lose it. Those who lose their lives for my sake and the sake of the gospel will save it. He's saying the God who is will suffer. The God who is will be rejected. The God who is will be killed. And I need everybody in Metropolitan to understand, I don't care how much you pray, how much you pay in tithes, what your situation or your stewardship or your position in the church, you will suffer, you will be rejected, you will die. You will suffer, you will be rejected, you will die. You will suffer, you will be rejected, you will die. Is anybody here who suffered? Let me hear you today. If you've suffered, if you've been rejected, let me hear you today. If you have tasted and seen death, let me hear you today. You will suffer, you will be rejected, you will die. But I need somebody to say, spoiler alert. The suffering is real. The rejection is real. The death is real. But can I tell you there's something else that is real, and that is God's power over death. The reason I keep on getting up in the morning is because God has power over death. You need to understand at the end of our 40-day journey, God will have power over death. Is there anybody in Metropolitan today? You got a testimony that God has power over death, power over sickness, power over disease, power over oppression, power over injustice, power over hatred. Somebody say power. There will be suffering. There will be rejection. There will be death. But God has the last word. And God's last word is life. God's last word is life more abundantly. Is anybody here today who knows God wants you to live and not die? That God has life for you and love for you and hope for you and joy for you. Somebody say yes. Upon theological reflection, the God who is a God who will suffer. The God who is a God who will be rejected. The God who is a God who will die. But the God who is also the God who early on Sunday morning will arise with all power in his hand. Do you know what I'm talking about today? Power. Don't go to your therapist saying, I believe God has abandoned me because I'm going through something. Go to your therapist and say, I'm going through something and God's going through it with me. And we're going to come out together on the other side. Don't go to your pastor crying about all of the difficulties that you have, because I could sit down and cry to you about all the difficulties I have. You know what we're going to do? We're going to sit down together and say we're going through it, but God is walking with us and God will not abandon us, and we are coming through on the other side. Are there any other side people here today who've gone through on the other side? If you've gone through on the other side, shout glory. If you're going through on the other side, shout hallelujah. Will suffer, will be rejected, will be killed. But on the third day, everybody on your feet. Look at somebody and say, the third day is coming. I look at all that foolishness in the newspaper and I say the third day is coming. I read about all of the economic devastation. I say the third day is coming. Look at all of this gentrification and how the mayor and the members of the council are getting broke off by developers, throwing Negroes out of their houses. The third day is coming.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Hallelujah.
Look at this president giving money to his buddies and cutting out SNAP, cutting out money to help the poor. I want you to know, Mr. Baldspot.
Yes, sir.
Third day is coming. Mr. McConnell, you stole a Supreme Court justice from the duly elected President of the United States, Mr. Barack Obama. I want you to know, Tippy Turtle, the third day.
Third day. Yes, sir. Third day. Yes, sir.
Mr. Ryan, you grew up in the Catholic Church. You have read the social teachings of the church. You know that Jesus died as a poor man on behalf of the poor, yet you want to keep people locked in poverty. Third day is coming. Y'all, I got a long list of folk who need to hear. Y'all know somebody named cancer?
Yes, sir.
Third day is coming. Y'all know something called misogyny?
Yes.
Third day is coming.
Yes, sir.
That's woman hating if you don't know.
Yes.
Y'all know something called homophobia?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Third day is coming.
Yes, sir.
Y'all know something called racism?
Yes, sir.
Third day is coming.
Yes, sir. Hallelujah.
Doors of the church are open. Third day is coming, and you ought to come too. You came here thinking your suffering, your rejection, death that comes to you means that God has rejected you. No, God took those things into the holy body of God, and God lived those things, went through those things. But the third day is coming. As the choir sings, the doors of the church are open. I think some of you are coming too. The third day is coming.